Mosab, welcome to Voz. Most of our audience doesn't know about you, but I'm going to give them a very brief summary. Mosab was born in Ramallah, in the West Bank. He's an Arab. He has an issue with the Palestinian identity, which I'll ask him about. But his father was one of the founders of the Hamas group, considered terrorist by the United States. And he grew up in that environment and he saw a lot of things. And then at some point in his life, he rejected that upbringing, and that marked probably the rest of his life. So we're going to try to get him to talk about that a little bit here as well. Mosab, you wrote a book which I bought. I actually checked my Amazon account and I bought it the week it came out, called Son of Hamas, back in 2010. And then at that time you were already in the U.S. And then you wrote another book that's called Hamas to America. And I didn't read that book, but if you could tell us a little bit about what the story is about, Hamas to America.
Yeah, from Hamas to America is focused on part of my journey, my life journey in the Middle East, growing up in that culture, part of my work with the Israeli intelligence, our effort in counter-terrorism, but most importantly is my inner journey in relation to the outside world, which goes from very violent culture in the Middle East, conditioned by a violent ideology, then the transformation from that place to the land of opportunity, where the challenges were completely different. So now how I responded to both cultures and how I adapted to the change. It's a massive change.
You were a member of Hamas and you were imprisoned in an Israeli prison. And at some point while you're there and you see the terrorist attacks that are going on against civilians,
Yes.
something tells you that you have to stop this. And this is how you begin to help the Israelis avert these attacks, correct?
Correct. But to come to that place had many other reasons. Some of them were personal. And I personally, since childhood, did not like violence. And to be brought up in a culture that praises violence by the name of religion, by the name of nationalism, always was a question, even though it was my family's business. During the first and second Palestinian Intifada, many people were killed. Suicide bombing attacks carried by Hamas and other Palestinian terrorists targeted people indiscriminately. It did not only kill Jews, it killed also foreigners, Arabs, Muslims, children, women, elders. The suicide bombing scenes cannot be forgotten. And if I tell you that I suddenly decided to fight against that, I wouldn't be telling you the truth. I had to lose a lot in order to come to that conclusion, because fighting against suicide bombing attacks meant literally fighting against my own family, their political interest, and the Palestinian agendas in general.
In a conference last night that I attended that you gave, you mentioned that as a child, I believe, your father took you to a meeting of all the Palestinian factions with Yasser Arafat, and that in that meeting, which was went on at the same time that Arafat, I mean, he got a Nobel Peace Prize for signing a peace agreement with the Israelis,
Yeah.
but at the same time, while he was supposedly working for peace with Israel, these factions decided to approve suicide bombings against civilians, and that you witnessed that, and that probably affected you enormously.
Yes. First of all, Yasser Arafat was an Egyptian person, and people looked up to him as the father of the Palestinian revolution. When he came back to the West Bank and Gaza, Yasser Arafat came with an agreement as a peace partner. And the condition was that he would drop violence and terrorism. Soon after his return, he adapted to violence. Again, he encouraged Hamas. He did not stop Hamas violence to pressure his peace partner, compromising fundamentals and encouraging people to carry more terrorist attacks. So that was a big conflict and a huge deception. The information was shocking even for Israel, not because Israel thought Yasser Arafat was a peaceful man, but because to adapt to violence after your commitment to peace, after being rewarded with the Nobel Peace Prize, knowing that this could lead to chaos, not only against Israel, but also chaos against Palestinians and jeopardizing the Palestinian dream of building their own state. So this type of irresponsibility, not only the terrorism against Israel, but just like how a leader can gamble and deceive and manipulate public and the global community, something is not acceptable.
You mentioned that Arafat was born in Egypt, so this gives me an idea for something I'd like to ask you. He was the leader of the PLO. PLO was an organization created partly by the Soviet Union. But Arafat, until the Israelis let him into the West Bank, he had never lived in the Palestinian territories before. He was born in Egypt and he had always lived outside. He led an organization that was based outside. How was life for the Palestinians before the PLO arrived there? Before the peace process officially began, how was life for the Palestinians like you living in Ramallah, living in these territories that were controlled by Israel? I mean, as far as checkpoints go, as far as the normalcy of life, as far as the interaction with the Israelis, how was it? Because something changed after Arafat and his people arrived.
Yeah. Well, first of all, they weren't Palestinians. We are Arabs. And there are Arabs in Israel, there are Arabs in the West Bank, there are Arabs in Gaza. This is our ethnicity. Now, Palestinian, this is an ideology that developed strongly after the establishment of the State of Israel. Yasser Arafat, the PLO, came approximately 20 years after the establishment of Israel, and this is when they founded the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. So the Palestinian is an ideology. So you can say there are Arabs, there could be other ethnicities that they just adapt to the Palestinian indoctrination. The Palestinian indoctrination, from the beginning, the sole purpose of this movement has been focused on the destruction of the State of Israel. After 40 years of Yasser Arafat, the PLO, and the various Palestinian movements, regardless of their orientation, some of them are communists, some of them are Islamists, Muslim Brotherhood, nationalists. Most of this, you can call them political gangs, have been conflicted, but they found in Israel a common enemy. So Palestinian is not an ethnic group, it's not a human race, it's not even a religion, it's a violent political ideology. After 40 years of violence, global violence, which included assassinations, hijacking of commercial airplanes, blowing up commercial airplanes, kidnapping, all type of violence that mostly targeted civilians. Yasser Arafat came to the conclusion that it was not paying off. And this is, I think, when the international community pressured Israel to sit on the negotiating table to put an end for the global chaos. Because Yasser Arafat's strategy, and actually Yasser Arafat's war, was not inside the Palestinian territories where he claimed. Most of his violence was abroad, international. So this is how he globalized the Intifada, and this is how he blackmailed everybody to recognize his violence and validate his movement.
The reason I was asking about life is because we hear a lot about genocide and we hear about victimhood, but when you look at history, you see that during after the Six-Day War, when Israel took control of these territories that were populated by Arabs, and during the years that passed between that and the time when the PLO took control of most of it, you see that that's when most of the universities were created for Arabs in that area. And life, from what I've heard, was very different. I mean, there were no checkpoints. They actually lived together with the Israelis, the Arabs in these territories that Israel gained control of in 1967, had a very different life before than the one they had after Arafat and his people arrived. And you probably remember some of that because you grew up at that time.
It's not what I remember or I don't remember, it's the facts. You know, at that time, prior to the establishment of the State of Israel, was...
Not the State of Israel, prior to the PLO arriving after the peace process. So that from the time of the 1967 war until the PLO was handed control of the West Bank and Gaza, how were those years for the Arabs living there?
Right. It was the golden time because of Israel. What so-called Palestinians, or let's say the Arabs in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, were the most educated Arab society in comparison to the rest of the Arab world. And this is why they were employed by the Arab oil countries. They were paid very high salaries, and it has been known that Palestinians were the most educated Arab society. And that's thanks to Israel and being close to Israel. They earned money from working in Israel in pretty much many fields. And they earned lots of money from the Arab world. We had the freedom to travel anywhere with no restrictions. That included Israel. Those who were still in the State of Israel and became Israeli citizens because they were living there, they had their property, and they did not leave their property as a result of the war had all type of opportunities. Now, we traveled back and forth. They came to visit us. We visited them. Actually, more than that, Jewish families came to Ramallah. I remember rabbis coming to our market, shopping during the weekend, and nobody harassed them. People appreciated their business. Other Israelis came to fix their cars, and there was exchange on many levels. People were not radicalized. But when the PLO was established and Yasser Arafat was actually enjoying the Arab oil money in the billions because of his political movement, many regimes tried to silence Yasser Arafat or to keep him under control by funding his operation. And he became addicted to power. He became addicted to money and to play the big role. Now, in order for him to keep the chaos going, to keep the revolution thriving, this is when he decided to ignite the revolution within the territories. And this is when the first Palestinian Intifada started. And within 2-3 years, the Intifada turned the reality upside down. The economy was destroyed, the educational system was paralyzed, the transportation system, and Israel gradually started placing checkpoints to prevent the new recruitment of the Palestinian Liberation Organization from infiltrating into Israel and stabbing people and committing
essentially
terrorism.
To prevent terrorist attacks in
yes, of course.
Yeah,
It was the checkpoints and all the development up to the wall or the fence, security fence, are based on security, solely for security reasons. Israel did not need to build the wall or the fence if it wasn't for the Palestinian.
It was a response to
Palestinian violence. Yeah.
Now, the one of the characteristics of the Western left today is their infatuation with the so-called Palestinian cause, which even the label of Palestinian you see as something ideological more than an ethnic label, right? Because an Arab from the West Bank is very similar to an Arab from the East Bank or from Syria.
Yeah.
It's kind of like somebody from New Jersey and New York and Pennsylvania, right?
Right.
The Western left is infatuated with this Palestinian cause, and this is riddled with contradictions because they are defending a society and a leadership that have values that are diametrically opposed to the values of the Western left.
Right.
This becomes almost a parody, for example, when you have these queers for Palestine, right? Who would be thrown alive from rooftops if they were in Gaza. But the commonality here is that these Arabs referred to as Palestinians have become the poster child for the victim among nations. And there's nothing left in the West, nothing that the Western left values more than this quality of victim, this self-proclaimed victim. But whose victims are the Arabs commonly known as Palestinians? Who are they? Are they the victims of?
It's a self-victimhood and it's self-inflicted suffering and pain. Again, when you look at violent ideologies, now anybody who actually justify violence for any lame reason consider themselves part of the revolution, part of the movement. So today, when we have this global movement for Palestine, the members of the movement are pro-violence. They believe that the use of violence targeting civilians indiscriminately is a justified and validated act. They call it resistance. They believe that resistance is legitimate. Of course, when they choose fancy terminology like resistance, based on false narrative of occupation, apartheid, colonialism, or even the very basic lie that there was a Palestine as a country with a majority of Arab ethnicity is the biggest lie of our time.
Let me ask you something else. You spent many years in the U.S. and you got to know American society from up close. America, as you know, is a nation of immigrants, traditionally following a melting pot model where everyone, regardless of their origin, became an American. But in the 21st century, the left has appended that, putting now a great emphasis on identity as a means of dividing society up. How do you compare that to the situation in the Middle East, in countries like Lebanon, for example? And how does this emphasis on identity weaken the United States and American society?
Look, identity is always the crisis of many individuals, that they're looking for something to identify with. They're looking for a movement. They're looking for a community. And I think many people in the West, many individuals in the West, are looking for something new. And the rise of the Palestinian movement, it gives you a very clear idea that many people are living in victimhood. They are lost. And they are taking civilization for granted. So they're looking now for foreign ideologies, whether if it's communism, Islamism, other religions. And this is why many people have been falling to the lie of Palestine, not realizing what they actually identify with. Some of it is out of boredom, some of it is just in a desperate need for a cause, for an identity. So now when they see the violence and the outcome of Hamas atrocities on October 7, not only Hamas atrocities on October 7, the atrocities and the continuous violence, the continuous attempts to annihilate the Jewish people. This is what brought us to the destruction of Gaza and the suffering of the Palestinian people. So now, without them understanding the dynamic of this conflict and the root cause of the conflict, focusing on the artificial, which is occupation. Now, we're already talking about a very good reason for the people to fight and to kill and to... And of course, they want to reduce a 1,400 years conflict to a conflict or dispute over land. And we tell them, no, this is not the reality. So now I see this entire generation of, the new generation of Palestinians worldwide, globally, been indoctrinated on, based on the lies and the lame reasons behind this conflict, ignoring the most fundamental and ideological reasons behind it. Many of them want to be part of the cause because they feel automatically that they are the saviors. But the savior requires victims. And as long as the victimhood continues, then they can feel that they stand on the higher moral ground. It's psychological defect. And again, the more I study, the more I look into the Palestinian evolution, I realize that's nothing but a mental illness. The closest diagnosis would be victimhood. And it looks like many Westerners and many people around the world choose to be a victim.
No, this is what attracts them to this movement, of which they don't know very much. And you talk about 14 centuries, and obviously that, to me, is a hint of you're talking about Islam and the fact that Islam is unwilling to recognize the legitimacy of an Israeli state in land that was once Muslim, right? I mean, and this is probably the origin of this conflict and the reason that propels it. But this population wasn't very religious before. It's been also indoctrinated into this Islamism, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if I want to go back to the 7th century, the conflict was, according to the Islamic books, I don't know if it's accurate or not, and I don't know if Muhammad ever existed, but Muhammad represented himself as an alternative to the Jewish prophets. And he claimed to be the final prophet. So Islam is a replacement to Judaism. It's a replacement to Christianity. And this is, I think, the problem. If Islam recognized Christianity, Judaism as two legitimate religions, that they're still valid, then we wouldn't have a problem between the Muslims and the Jews to coexist in the same land. But fundamentally, the Muslims believe, and that's according to the Quran, to the Hadith, to the Islamic legislation, that prior to Muhammad, Judaism and Christianity were two legitimate religions. But the moment Muhammad was born, and the moment Muhammad became the prophet, the messenger of Allah, both religions became invalid. Hence, Muhammad replaced those two religions with Islam. So now, if you go to Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa Mosque sits on the top of the Jewish temple. Mm-hmm. And
that's the reason why it was built there to begin.
Yes. Right. So that's the replacement right now. So now the temple is canceled. It's illegitimate. And now the only legitimate house of worship is the mosque. So the actual conflict, and that's not only between what's so-called Palestinians, it's between the Muslim world of 2 billion people and the small religious minority of the Jewish people, is basically a religious war, at least from the Muslim side. And the attempts to annihilate the Jewish people did not begin after the British Mandate of Palestine. Prior to that, we have 400 years of Ottoman Empire, which basically cleansed the Jewish people from the land. And this is how the Jews end up scattered all over the globe. Prior to that, there were also many attempts. We can root it back to the 14th century, for the 7th century, when actually Muhammad cleansed the Jewish people from the Arab Peninsula.
Right.
And slaughtered.
But if the Jews weren't there today, then they would move on to the Christians, right? And,
of course.
And they actually do in some of these countries.
Of course, this is the basis of my argument, and this is why I say it's very dangerous. Because if I personally to allow the Muslims in their delusion to annihilate one human race, this means that tomorrow they will go after the Christians. And after they go after the Christians, would go after the Hindus. and after the Buddhists. This is why today I say that the world must unify. Must unify not to fight against the Muslims. I don't want a global war. That's not what I'm asking for. But when the Muslims feel that the world is united, finally, that the world is aware of the Islamic ambition that's trying to dominate, create one global state. This is a Nazi ideology, a lot more dangerous than Nazi ideology, by the name of the divine and by the authority of the divine. Then the Muslims would never retreat. So many Westerners and many people, even in the East, buying the lie that this conflict is over what's so-called Palestine. And we tell them, no, this is not what it is. And if we validate it, if we justify this process of ethnic cleansing that have started 1400 years ago, if they succeed of doing this, you validate the violence against every civilization, against every human being. And that's not the way of life. This is not the way of existence. We are all children of God. And the Muslims need to wake up from their delusion and accept that the Jews are the children of God. They are the legitimate children of God. The Christians as well. Everybody, every living being is a projection of the divine intelligence. So, like for me to really look back and see that people really still living in this darkness and determined to erase a human race. It's just, this is insanity. This is madness.
Mosab, have you been following the U.S. elections that are, I imagine like everybody else at least.
Right.
We have elections coming up in the United States. How do you think these could potentially affect the situation in the Middle East and also in the rest of the world? What's going on in the U.S. and this election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump?
You know, I try to keep myself out of the politics because it's just a temporary thing. But naturally, I don't like hypocrites. And sometimes I prefer real people. I always like new blood coming into the political arena to create the necessary change. And I hope that in this election we will see something new. With due respect, Kamala Harris has been in office for 4 years. And I wonder why she didn't do all the job that she's promising the people to do. 4 years weren't enough. What was she busy doing? And why she's coming now towards the end of her party's term to promise people of so many fancy ideas and promises in the future, just very similar to the promises of the Muslims of the afterlife. Well, you had your opportunity. It's about time to step out of it. Allow other people to do the work. So I personally am straightforward. I don't like hypocrisy. These people come to power and they are very poor people from poor background, and suddenly they have lots of money, and the public does not even ask them, where did you get your wealth from? So for me, I feel a lot safer when I see a billionaire who's actually reducing himself to the level of politics. He's got the luxury, he's got the security, and I would trust someone who's already successful, who's not coming with lust for money. And that's the source of evil. So I think I'm done with the Democratic Party for a while, and I would like to see some change. Yeah.
Let me end this interview with a more personal question that you can choose whether to answer or not. But you grew up in an environment that you came to regard as immoral and that you have resoundly rejected.
Yeah.
How was the process of going from being the son of a Hamas sheikh to being the son of Christ?
Um, it's a long process. It's not an easy journey. It's turbulent, and I had to make very difficult choices that went against, first of all, my personal interest, then against my family's interest, then against the national interest, then against the religious interest. And I had to break free from these cycles and transcend so many barriers. And this is a continuation it's an everyday process that I have to make sure where is my mental barrier and how I transcend that. Now, to claim that I am the son of Christ today,
A son of Christ, yes.
or a son of Christ, this is also another barrier that it's a creation of my own mind. Then for me, this becomes a destination, and I disagree with that. I consider Christ as a friend, as a fellow traveler, actually, that I can identify a lot with his struggle because he had to go against the flow of his own society. In the process, he got crucified. And I know what it takes to go against the agreeable, especially when a majority agree on something wrong, on something evil. Hence, they want you dead. If you contradict with their narrative, if you contradict with their theory, by practice, by the way, not only that I have a theory that is defying theirs, I have practice, they have theories. And this is where you pose a real threat against such society because you automatically forcing them to think out of their box. And they don't like this. They want to stay in their cave of delusion. Not to talk too much philosophy, but maybe this is the closest image for those who understand the human nature, what I can say. That I don't know a final destination. I don't want to arrive at a final destination because that means death, literally means death. For me, life is infinite, with infinite possibilities. And my universal being is beyond this physical body and is beyond my mind. So I would never reduce myself to a function, to a status, or to even my thinking process. So with that said, I don't know why I was born in the Middle East to such a family, but I know what it really took to emancipate myself out of that imprisonment. But again, if I tell you that was the only imprisonment of my life, I lie to you. I think any mental state is a form of imprisonment. We have to keep ourselves in check. Today, I don't represent any political movement. I am not representing a religion. I'm not representing Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. I have lived so many cultures. That includes also Buddhism, Hinduism, and other spiritual practices. This is my life journey, and I don't wish for it to end anywhere. So I live day by day. I appreciate my freedom. I appreciate my individuality. And the last thing I want to be ruled by savages or by fanatics or by those who are righteous. And that's my personal freedom.
Thank you for your time, Mosab.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.